last 20 tax years. Around 116,000 people are currently UK non-doms. Labour says ending non-dom status will raise hundreds of millions of pounds. The Conservatives say non-doms would leave Britain, taking their spending with them and costing hundreds of millions of pounds. So who's right? With us, James Bloodworth, editor of Left Foot Forward, and Jake Wallis-Simons, associate editor at Mail Online. Thank you both for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon. James, let's bring in you first of all, should we, editor of Left Foot Forward. So presumably you will be agreeing with Labour that it will mean that something like several £100 million could either have to be paid or those people will leave the country. We've heard from Conservatives saying something completely different.
Yes, well, I'd say there are two really good arguments for this. One of them's a moral argument and one of them's an economic argument. The moral argument is that non-doms will now, under Labour's proposals, be treated the same way that the rest of us are treated in the tax system. If we have to pay, we can't squirrel our money off overseas. If we're living in this country, if we're using public services, which after all cost money, then we have to pay tax on all of our earnings. The second point is the economics of it. We hear a lot from politicians of all parties about the importance of paying off the deficit. We've had some very big cuts to public services. We've also seen those people who are on benefits hit by many cuts to their income. And it seems only fair that then we should ask these are very rich people to pay their fair share if they are living in the UK.
So it's going to create shed loads of money then, Jake Wallis-Simons. Simons, forgive me, Jake.
That's okay. Well, I mean, I think that this whole debacle has just shown Labour to be a toxic combination of hypocrisy and incompetence. Because first of all, we've had this big announcement that Labour's going to abolish the non-dom status, supposedly raising all this money for the UK. Then it emerged that Ed Balls himself, in an interview in January, said that it wouldn't raise any money at all, that it was a bad idea. After that, Ed Balls came out fighting and said that the Tories had somehow doctored his television interview, which was just bizarre for anybody who's seen it. Then we had the spectacle of a Labour shadow Treasury Minister unable to name a single independent expert who had supposedly advised that this was a good idea. It's been an utter shambles. And the fact is that abolishing non-dom status for all foreign nationals would not just affect the super rich, it would also affect people like foreign doctors and skilled workers that we need in our NHS and elsewhere. And these people aren't doing anything wrong. They're paying their UK tax. They're paying a charge of about £30,000 or more to have this status. And I think Labour is just, as I said, a combination of hypocrisy and incompetence with a smattering of populism, trying to con you out of your vote rather than giving you a sensible economic policy.
So there will be this sort of temporary status, I think Labour has said, James, both for foreign professionals and also for students working or studying here in the United Kingdom. But nevertheless, doesn't Jake have a point?
I think that's the temporary status is very important, because if you're a student, for example, and you're in the UK temporarily, you don't want to have to kind of rearrange all your tax affairs just to come to the UK to study, and we don't want to put those people off, which the coalition have been very effective at putting students off coming to Britain, but that's for a whole different reason. We don't want to put those people coming to the UK. But I think it comes down to a very simple question. Should the same tax rules apply to working people and to very, very wealthy people? I think undoubtedly yes, and I'm very glad Labour's finally seen this point.
We all need to abide by the rules, Jake.
But most British people in the UK don't have a home elsewhere. The same rules apply for British people who are living abroad in many countries around the world. And I think that quite clearly Labour is just grandstanding and trying to take a populist position, positioning themselves as the party that bashes the rich and trying to get your vote without actually having any sensible economic policy to back it up. I mean, only yesterday we had the ghoulish spectacle of Tony Blair being resurrected from the dead and coming out in support of Labour, of Ed Miliband. But let's not forget that Tony Blair was a great supporter of business, and during the time when he was busy ruining our economy, Ed Miliband and Ed Balls were at the heart of the Labour government. So the whole thing smacks of hypocrisy and incompetence and electioneering.
I'm glad it's not just me that get those names wrong, Jake. James, politics of envy is what it is, isn't it?
I don't think so. There aren't. any major economies in the world which allow this, and we've allowed it for around 200 years. I don't think, for example, we can look at the United States and say this is a country that doesn't have a thriving business community. And lots of these people, take Roman Abramovich, for example, the manager of Chelsea. Lots of this income is non-productive income. It's not actually been earned wealth in the same way that us and most working people in the UK earn their money. It's people in the UK using services, often buying up houses which they don't live in, and not paying the taxes here that everyone else pays. I think that's patently unfair. I think most people will agree.
To be fair, I think he actually says that he's a Russian resident, so he doesn't spend enough time in the United Kingdom for it to be an issue. Stephen Kay has tweeted this afternoon, Jake, and hi to you, Stephen. He says, if we do not axe non-doms, then why not just up the charges so it's a similar fee to what the tax would be? Seems fair.
Yes, I mean, nobody's saying that this policy doesn't need tweaks. Of course it needs tweaks and it needs reforms. I mean, for instance, at the moment, under the current policy, you can inherit non-dom status from your father, but not from your mother, which is just bizarre. And lots of these sorts of alterations need to be made and should be made, including perhaps enabling us to get a bit more money out of non-doms. And in fact, George Osborne has done that during his time in office and perhaps should do more. But what Labour are proposing is something radically different from that. It's not sensible, it's not a subtle and effective economic policy. It's simply slash and burn. It's going to drive a lot of wealth creators out of the UK and a lot of job creators out of the UK. It's going to affect doctors and other skilled people that we need in Britain and prevent them from coming to the UK. And it's going to be hugely damaging. And ultimately, we should return to this single point, which is they're trying to con you out of your vote by posturing as the party that stands up for the poor against the rich, when the reality is very, very different.
Ha! There you go, James. They're going to flee like lemmings.
I've not seen any evidence of this so far. We hear this cry whenever there's any kind of tax proposed on the very wealthy, that they're all going to up sticks, move a rule. Where are they going to go? Which are these other countries which have this rule in that Labour is now planning to get rid of? I don't see them, and I don't see any evidence.
Countries where they're resident, which is the issue in the first place.
Well,
there's a reason they want to live in London.
I mean, they're going to go to Dubai, they're going to go to Singapore, other countries,
Ireland,
Switzerland, Ireland. There's lots of other countries that they may go to. And in fact, Robert Peston, the BBC correspondent, said just today that as soon as this policy was announced, he had a call from a senior banker saying that he was going to leave. And lots of his friends were going to go with him. I think that the bare fact is that we need people who are living legitimately in the UK, paying UK taxes, paying a charge to have this tax status, in Britain, creating wealth and creating jobs and driving the recovery.
The same way everyone else pays their tax.
OK, just a final thought. Jake, you were doing so well until you mentioned the other side, so I'm going to give the last word to James.
It's very simple. Should there be one rule for everyone who lives in this country, who uses public services? Should they all pay the same taxes? I think undoubtedly yes.
Gentlemen, great to talk to you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
And do keep your thoughts coming in. Lots of you tweeting this afternoon on what you think about the non-dom status and what should happen. Do you think that, as Labour suggests, it should be done away with, and that's what exactly they would do after the 7th of May if they find themselves in number 10? Or do you think actually it wouldn't create enough